If you've just got your first acrylic marker set, or you're thinking about getting your first set and you're unsure about how to use them, let me give you 5 tips that will help you create art that you love with your acrylic markers. The main reasons why I love acrylic markers for my art is that they are vibrant, they capture really bright and rich hues, the ink is really opaque. If you layer them, they really block out what's underneath, which is great for lots of different surfaces. They dry quickly, which can make them ideal for working quickly. You can get good control with them because they are in pen form, so it feels like drawing, which is great for illustrating on a smaller scale. And they're really easy to travel with because you can feel like painting but not pack all your paints and accessories, and these give that same kind of vibe of paint. Today I felt like painting this photo I took when I was in Italy, which was really giving spring, and I wanted to capture the essence of brightness, positivity, playfulness that spring gives me, so I knew acrylic markers would help me do this. So my first tip, which is an absolute must and you cannot skip, is swatch all your colours on the paper you will be using. Do not skip this step. You need to see how your markers will look like on the paper you are drawing on, because like with many mediums, there is a slight color shift when it dries. And because I chose to use tan paper, I also needed to see how the colors would look on this darker surface, which would not be the same than if I was using it on white paper. Another reason why it's so important to swatch markers is that you're not seeing the colours on a palette, so you actually can't see what the colour really looks like until you've swatched it and you have it in front of you for reference. If you followed me for a little while, you'll know that I love using toned paper to paint on, and this is no exception with these markers too. I love how these acrylic markers look on toned paper. I find toned paper not only really satisfying because the colours just pop on toned paper in a way that they don't on white paper, but also because it's a little less intimidating for me to start a piece on toned paper. I'm not too sure why that is actually. I think there may be an explanation to do with like starting with a mid-tone as a base versus with white. But anyway, there's a little bonus tip. If you have toned paper, definitely think about using it for these markers. I think you'll be really satisfied with the end result. My second tip is don't overblend and embrace the pen marks that these markers create. Achieving perfect blends and gradients can be so frustrating, whether it's with paints, with gouache, with alcohol markers, with acrylic markers. The sooner you liberate yourself from trying to achieve perfect blends and gradients of colors, you will find yourself closer to understanding what your true art style is. The reason I say this is because embracing the medium and its visible marks is going to help you develop your style a lot more and actually help your art look more interesting. You can see as I'm painting the sky, my aim is not to perfectly replicate the smooth gradient in the photo or make the clouds look the same. What I'm trying to do is convey the essence of the sky and using the photo to guide myself. Embracing the pen marks and not trying to achieve perfect blends is going to help your pieces look more unique and illustrative. Capturing the essence of something instead of trying to perfectly replicate the colors and the blending is going to help you translate the reference in your own unique way. This has been a really important lesson in my own art journey, which I always go back to and I'm still evolving in. Now, having said all that, it doesn't mean that you won't be doing some blending. I've done a little bit of blending, as you've seen in this footage, with the clouds and the sky. And so my tip here is that if you want to blend directly on the paper and do it quickly. Sometimes a bit of blending is required to create an effect. For my clouds, I wanted to soften some of the lines and to create some of that fluffy illusion. And you'll want to be quick because acrylic markers dry really quickly. So to be able to blend between the two colors, you'll want to focus on one small area and blend the colors there. Sometimes you can even use your finger to kind of dab and soften some of the paint between the two colors. I've seen some people use these markers with a palette and actually blend the ink on the palette itself, creating new shades of colors, and also using a brush to blend on the paper. But I think this kind of defeats the point of using these as markers. Of course, no judgment if you want to do that. I'm a big believer you should use the mediums you want, however you want, or however you prefer. But I do think that if you're a beginner or if you're getting started with these markers, it can be a bit overwhelming to see them used in more complicated ways. So I guess what I'm saying is you don't need to overcomplicate yourself and embrace the fact that they are markers and embrace the limits that they have. I think some of the best art can be created within limits. Anyway, one thing to look out for is hard nib versus soft nib acrylic markers. These are soft nib and have a brush-like tip, which is great for that painterly look. One of the most helpful tips for me was don't try to find the perfect color matches to your reference. With markers, it can feel like you need a set of 385 to have every single color that you could possibly need. But honestly, that would be so overwhelming, and those sets are really, really overwhelming to use. And you end up losing so much time finding the perfect colors, and then the end piece doesn't even look that cohesive if you use that many colors. As I said before, having limits is good, and I think the smaller sets are actually going to be the best to work with. So how can you create with a limited palette? Well, the first step is simplify your reference. Focus on value, so how light and dark a color is, and try to only have 2 or 3 variations of a color per area. For example, on the grass, I wanted a mid-tone green, a dark green, and a light green, as that is what I was observing in the reference and what I know will create depth to the grass to make it look not flat. And then I added the little details of the flowers in yellow and white on top of that. But the reality was that I really didn't use a ton of different shades of green, even though I could have picked more shades of green in this area. On the horizon line, there are lots of different tones of green and brown, but I simplified and I knew I had to pick out a really dark color for the shadows and then a couple of different shades of brown to build the trees on top of that. Here you can actually see me blend between the brown and the green to create a kind of darker green or a different hue of green, and then I actually go in with black to add some of that depth that you can see in the reference photo. But that's really it for the kind of darker areas, and then once I'm done with that, I'll go in with a lighter brown to start building some of those trees and details on top. So again, not a ton of different colors, just really simplifying and picking out a few colors for those shadows and then a few lighter colors for details on top. And I want to really encourage you to think that you don't need to be an expert at color theory here. Really stick to those principles of a mid-tone, a darker value, and then a lighter value, and go from there. You may find that that's enough, you may want to add a little bit more, but you'll see that actually per area, I'm really not using more than 3, maybe 4 colors, and sometimes less. So less is more with this approach. And the same is true for the house. In the photo, you can see a variety of tones of pink, but in reality, you only really need 1 shade of pink and then 1 shade that you can use for the shadows. So that's really it. And that's why your swatches are great, because you can refer back to them and see what 2 colors would go well. And I picked this kind of brown, light brown for the shadows, and I did all the shadows on the house in that light brown, and it had a really great effect. Then, of course, I can go as detailed as I want, so I did end up going in and picking out some of the darker kind of areas with an even darker brown and some of those highlights in white, but that's really it. That's kind of like the base, and then from there I can decide if I want to add more detail. The last tip I want to touch on with these markers is layering. So if you know me from my gouache videos, you know that I love layering, and that's my approach with gouache. Luckily, you can do a very similar approach with these markers because acrylic paint is very opaque and you can layer really well with it. So you'll just want to make sure that with every section that you're doing, you're starting with the thing that is furthest back and then moving forward. So with the house, I started with the pink and then I built on the shadows, and now I'm building on all the greenery that is in front of the house. And generally you want the paint to dry before you build on the next layer. The good news is that these acrylic markers, they dry super quickly, so you can build on the layers very quickly as well. I hope these tips have been useful for you, and if you want to follow along with this particular reference, I'll link it below. But also remember that you can use your own reference photos of a landscape that means a lot to you, and these tips and approach are gonna work with it. So I am excited to see what you create, and let me know if you have any questions about anything that I've said during this video. And thanks again to Arrtx for sending me these markers and for sponsoring the video. I've been doing a lot of marker videos recently, which have been really well received, and I've been feeling the love on them, so thank you so much. My next video will be on gouache, so I'm excited to show you that, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!